Howdy, it's Kyle, counting down the 10 worst big city downtowns in the US. The downtown, or sometimes referred to as the Central Business District or CBD, should be the main district in your city. It should be the focal point neighborhood in the town where all the big things happen, where the big festivals and events go on, where they light the big Christmas tree in December. So, this should be the it neighborhood for the city, but not all downtowns are created equal. So, what I'm doing in this video is taking a look at the downtowns of the largest city of the 50 largest metros in the US to see which ones have the worst ones in the country. I used three main criteria to determine which city has the worst downtown. The first is whether or not the downtown is in fact the main neighborhood for the city, the primary focal point for big events. The second would be, does the downtown reflect the size of the greater city and metro? So sometimes you might be in a downtown that doesn't really feel anywhere near as big as the city in which it's a part of. And the third is it nice? Is downtown a nice place to be? Is it somewhere that the city leaders would say, come on down to our downtown if somebody's visiting? So let's take a look at the 10 worst big city downtowns in the US. Starting off the countdown at number 10 is Kansas City. The city has a population of about 510,000 people and is growing slowly. The overall metro area has about 2.2 million people. It's the 31st ranked metro in the US. It's a very spread out city and metro that could definitely use some infill downtown, and half the suburbs are across the state line in Kansas. And there are four main reasons that I believe hold back the downtown of Kansas City a little bit. The first is that the downtown, the Central Business District, isn't right along the river. So Kansas City is right where the Kansas and Missouri rivers are at their confluence, but most big cities have their downtowns right along the river. There's often a park there. It's kind of the center spot people come down to for summer concert series or where they do the fireworks on 4th of July, that kind of stuff. But for Kansas City, the confluence of the two rivers is not close to downtown, and there really isn't any development at all along the river. The second reason I think the downtown is held back is because most of the interesting neighborhoods in Kansas City are not downtown. You have the Westport neighborhood, which is the more historic area. You have a lot of restaurants and bars and clubs there. It's a very fun neighborhood. South of downtown is the Country Club Plaza. It's a very upscale shopping district, but it's also very car oriented. You also have the 18th and Vine Jazz Historic District where you have some restaurants and clubs there. So you have several different neighborhoods that are pulling from downtown. And Kansas City, it is a big city, but it isn't big enough to have a vibrant downtown, but also 4 or 5 other vibrant neighborhoods throughout the city. Something else that pulls away from downtown is that none of the 3 major sports stadiums are located downtown. The baseball stadium for the Royals and the football stadium for the Chiefs are out in the suburbs. And the soccer stadium for Sporting KC is just across the state line in Kansas. And that brings me to the fourth thing that I think holds back downtown Kansas City, Missouri, is the fact that there's Kansas City, Kansas. There's been another city right there all these years that has its own downtown. And even though it isn't anywhere near as big as KC, Missouri, it does still have a little bit of pull from a downtown perspective. So Kansas City, not a great downtown in my opinion, but not one of the absolute worst. It still is number 10. And at number 9 is Baltimore. The city has a population of about 565,000, and there's been population decline since the 1950s. It's the 30th largest city in the country. The Baltimore metro area has about 2.8 million people, and that includes Annapolis, and then it's also part of the greater DC-Baltimore combined metro, which has over 9 million people. With Baltimore being one of the oldest colonial cities in the US, there's a very historic downtown right there along the waterfront. You have many historic neighborhoods right nearby, and you have a lot of tourism. As a result, you also have the huge National Aquarium right downtown. However, the business end of downtown is where it really lacks. Most big cities, when you walk around downtown at a weekday at about 1 p.m., you see a lot of suits and high heels walking around, but for Baltimore, on the middle of a weekday, it just seemed kind of dead. It seemed like walking around there were more of your downtown characters types as opposed to people doing business in the high-rises. So with that, tourism tends to dominate downtown, and as a result doesn't have quite the same feel that you would expect a unique city to have. There are some cool, fun neighborhoods in Baltimore to the east and southeast of downtown, including Fells Point and Canton, but Baltimore is too big of a city to just have those. Every city has those kinds of party bar type neighborhoods, and also your trendy, funky, cool neighborhood like Baltimore has, but that leaves downtown to basically just the tourists. You do have some gentrification to the west side of downtown, with some of the old buildings getting turned into theaters and artist galleries. But overall, I would say that Baltimore is the city in the US that has the highest percentage of its aerial footprint that would be classified as slum or blight or abandoned. I would say about 10 to 15 years ago, it passed Detroit in that category. There's been a lot of gentrification in Detroit. It's been improving, but it's still pretty bad in many areas. But I do think Baltimore is perhaps a little on the decline still. At number 8 is Columbus, Ohio. The city has about 915,000 people. It's the 14th largest city in the country. The metro area has just under 2.2 million. It's the 32nd largest metro in the US. I think in the case of Columbus, the two things that have really taken away from the downtown is that the two main parts of the economy don't lead to a very vibrant type downtown. One is just a state capital for a very large state, so government type stuff is usually Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, maybe a happy hour crowd after that, but it gets pretty much dead in the evenings. And the other major part of the economy is Ohio State University that's located several miles north of downtown, so all the activity around that enormous university is several miles north of the CBD. And that huge university with a huge medical school leads to many medical type things going on in there, a lot of research, high-tech type stuff, biosciences. But something that's quite unique about Columbus is this distribution of its cool neighborhoods. So you have the heart of downtown, the CBD, where the government type stuff is. Just south of that is an area called the Brewery District. There's some cool restaurants and shops and bars there. Just north of downtown is a more established entertainment district called the Short North Arts District. And then just north of that is the campus of Ohio State University and the things that are associated with that, some of the things geared towards students. And then just north of that is another district called Old North Columbus, another spot with some pretty cool local restaurants and shops. But one thing that makes Columbus unique in that is that all of those neighborhoods I just mentioned are centered along the same street, High Street. Think how perfectly Columbus is set up to have a single streetcar line that goes from Old North down to the Brewery District. So there has been some nice infill in the city, and I do think the CBD will improve through the years, but for right now, it doesn't reflect the size of the city. I do think it's pretty weak overall. Coming in at number 7 is Phoenix. The population of the city is 1.7 million people. It's the 5th largest city in the US. The metro area has over 5 million people. It's the 10th largest metro in the country. The vast majority of the population growth in the Phoenix metro has been over the past 50 years, so entirely since the advent of cars being the main source of transportation. The city is very spread out. You have large single-family homes not very far from the CBD. So like many other Sunbelt cities, it's been very focused on cars, highways, one more lane, bro. But there are other factors that make downtown Phoenix pretty weak, especially for how big the city is. One thing that pulls from the city of Phoenix is that the suburbs are actually quite large. One of the suburbs is Tempe with a population of about 185,000 people, and it's home to the huge Arizona State University campus. So with being a pretty big city with a huge campus, it has its own downtown, its own student-oriented district, and Mill Avenue in Tempe is probably the most interesting, exciting, party kind of nightlife street in the metro. And another major suburb is Scottsdale. It has about 250,000 people with its own historic downtown, its own main street, its own cool shops and boutiques. So those are two pretty big suburbs. Plus you also have Mesa, which has over 500,000 people. It's the largest suburb in the US. But then you also have the suburb of Glendale with about 250,000 people. It's big enough to have stadiums, and the fact that Glendale is big enough for stadiums has been a huge fiasco for Phoenix. So you don't have the football stadium or hockey arena downtown, but what you do have downtown is the airport. I'm not sure what type of an impact the airport has had on the downtown itself, but it has impacted the height restrictions on the skyscrapers. So the downtown skyline certainly doesn't look that big, but this video isn't about the skyline, but nonetheless the downtown really isn't that exciting, especially for the 5th biggest city in the country. At number 6 is Orlando. And this is another Sunbelt city where the vast majority of the growth has been in the past 50 years, people driving in their cars, and it really wasn't even a city at all until the early 20th century. But it's also much bigger than a lot of people think. The city has about 320,000 people, and the metro area has almost 3 million. It's the 21st largest metro in the country. Orlando might be the single most spread out city in the country. It's just preposterously spread out, largely dealing with having to avoid some of the areas with sinkholes and just some of the areas that flood a lot, but still it's just so spread out, and it takes away from the downtown, I believe, because it's just so hard to get down there, even if you're not that far from the CBD. But what hurts downtown Orlando is the fact that the economy of the region is based entirely on something that's not near downtown, Disney World and Universal. So these theme park areas are fairly far to the southwest of downtown, so that's where all the tourists go. That's the big part of the economy there. So the downtown, I guess you could say, for Orlando might be International Drive, which is where all the main touristy type stuff is. So the CBD might be more historic, but iDrive is what drives the economy of Orlando. Right downtown, you have Lake Eola, which is a natural lake. It's actually a sinkhole that's just filled with water. If you look at a map of Orlando, you'll see a ton of these small lakes all throughout the metro, and basically all of them are sinkholes. The main heart of downtown would be Church Street and the Church Street Station. This is the historic heart of the city. You have a big entertainment district there. And with it being an historic train station, it does have an actual light rail stop there, but again, it doesn't go to the Disney area or to the airport. So with the city being so spread out, the main drivers of the economy not being anywhere near downtown, downtown hasn't been the main focus of the city. I think you are starting to see some more interest in people wanting to be closer to the city center because, again, it is so spread out, but for right now, it is still a pretty weak downtown, especially for such a large metro. Heading into the top 5, we have Washington. The city of Washington has about 678,000 people. It's the 23rd largest city in the country. The metro area has over 6 million. It's the 7th largest metro, and again, with Baltimore added to it, it's over 9 million in the combined metro. Now, admittedly, this is a little unfair, and I almost didn't put it into the video because of it, but it does have a weak downtown for a big city. Effectively, the downtown is the national mall, so in some ways you can say that DC has the greatest downtown in the country, but from an urban standpoint, it's pretty weak. But because it is the federal district and there's limitations on what can go on there, including height restrictions, what I'm talking about for downtown DC is actually across the Potomac River in Virginia in Rosslyn district of Arlington. So from DC, from the National Mall, you can look across the river and see those high-rises. That's Rosslyn, downtown Arlington. And as you might be able to tell, it's a newer, more purpose-built downtown. It feels a little fake almost. There's no historic quarter, and it's mainly office and government-type workers during the day. There isn't a whole lot of activity at night. There is a metro stop right there, so people come from all around the suburbs, go to work there, and then leave as soon as they're done. And even though DC itself doesn't have a downtown, there are some really cool, fun neighborhoods in the city, including Georgetown, Adams Morgan, and DuPont Circle. But those are your typical kind of really cool neighborhoods that most other big cities have, but there is, again, no big downtown CBD for DC. So of all the cities on this list, Washington is the only one that I actually really like. It's one of my favorite big cities in the country, but not because of its downtown. Going back down to Florida, at number 4, it's Jacksonville. It's much larger than you might think. The city has a population of about 1 million people. It's the 10th largest city in the country. However, the city is more than half the population of the metro, which has just over 1.7 million. It's the 38th largest metro in the U.S. The city of Jacksonville is not right on the beach. The St. Johns River goes right through town, and the main part of the downtown is right there along the riverfront. There used to be a spot there called the Jacksonville Landing, which was the main center high point of downtown. It had a lot of shops and restaurants there, but it was also kind of touristy. Later on, there were many issues with crime and some dilapidation and stores closing, and the entire Jacksonville Landing was demolished in 2020. And this is the main focal point of the CBD of Jacksonville. So right now, they're in the process of redeveloping it, but what they do there is going to have a huge impact on the overall downtown. But that's not the only major project going on downtown right now. You also have a lot of gentrification in districts within the CBD. One is called the Shipyards, and this was a more of an industrial type area. They're redeveloping it right now, including a brand new football stadium for the Jaguars. Another area undergoing some gentrification is called the Cathedral District, centered around some historic churches in the northeast part of downtown. And according to the folks behind the plan, they want a revitalized, green, urbanist type neighborhood. It's kind of in the beginning process of it, but we'll see where it goes. So these are 3 really big things going on right downtown with the Landing, the Shipyards, and the Cathedral Districts, but we really have to see what happens because these 3 projects can really make or break the downtown. I'll be honest, I'm a little skeptical as to what they're going to be doing with this stuff, but seemingly not very imaginative type projects, and you go on the websites of them, there aren't any major updates. But who knows, they could also hit a home run with all 3 of these projects and make downtown Jacksonville one of the best in the country. At number 3 is Virginia Beach. I mentioned it in my most recent video talking about metro areas with several anchor cities, and Virginia Beach is the largest city in that metro area that includes Norfolk. There are 460,000 people in Virginia Beach. It's actually the largest city in all of Virginia. And it's part of that Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Newport News, Hampton Roads metro that has about 1.8 million people. It's the 37th largest metro in the U.S. The vast majority of the city was developed in the second half of the 20th century. Again, Sunbelt type city, mostly car oriented. But I think city leaders realize that Virginia Beach is a big city on its own, and downtown Norfolk can have some major crime problems, so let's kind of come up with our own downtown for the biggest city in Virginia. And what they came up with is something called the Virginia Beach Town Center. This is mostly developed in the early 21st century, so not very long ago. And this is kind of like Roslyn, Virginia, but much more sterile. This seems very fake. It seems very forced. There's just a handful of chain restaurants there, and that's not really much of a reason to go there. So if you're going to Virginia Beach for vacation, you're probably going to be on the beach. That's the main focus of the city, and there really isn't any reason at all to go to the town center. It's well located, almost exactly halfway between downtown Norfolk and the beach, so it's located in the right spot, but this isn't very interesting. It has the same type of boutique chain shops you see in all the suburban malls in the country. It seems to me like the entire town center was designed by developers and the city just kind of rubber stamped whatever the developers came up with. I don't see imaginative city leaders and city planners coming up with this idea. But this is another city whose downtown is hurt by the fact that the main part of the economy for that city is not downtown, and for the case of Virginia Beach, it's the beach itself. It is a beautiful beach lined with all kinds of hotels and rental houses on the streets behind them, but it's nowhere near downtown, so all the activity being there takes away from the CBD, and that's why Virginia Beach has one of the worst downtowns in the country. Coming in as the second worst downtown in the US, it's Los Angeles. And this is the second largest city and metro in the country. The city has over 3.8 million people with a population decline, and LA County is the most populous county in the country with over 9.6 million people. But the things that hurt downtown LA are the same things that have hurt some of the other cities I mentioned on this list, and mainly because the large part of the economy has not been downtown. For LA, it's been the TV and movie industry, but those types of industries need more space than downtown can offer. They need big studios, big backlots. So you're not going to have that kind of stuff right downtown, but also for LA, a big part of the culture is the beach, and downtown isn't right there along the ocean. LA is actually the #1 city in the country for manufacturing, but that stuff isn't downtown. It's also the busiest port in the country, but that's not downtown either. But in terms of actual downtown CBD type things in LA, there are many others that act more like that than downtown Los Angeles itself. But the #1 reason why LA is this high on the list is downtown is just gross. So like all the other cities I've talked about in here, I'm just kind of going around the downtown on Google Street View, taking screenshots. And if you know this channel, I'm not trying to show the worst stuff, trying to show all the homeless areas and the skid rows, but you really can't go anywhere downtown LA that isn't, again, just kind of gross. This is the heart of downtown LA right here. It's called Pershing Square. Look at this nice, beautiful backdrop of a photo. But if you go 5 blocks in any direction from here, it gets to a pretty gnarly area with a lot of dilapidation, a lot of empty businesses, a lot of homeless. And every city has a skid row, but nowhere else in the country is skid row right in the CBD. You think about the worst urban homeless type districts in the US, the Tenderloin in San Francisco, Kensington and Philadelphia, but neither one of those are right downtown. And this is nothing new like post-COVID kind of stuff. I lived in LA in the late 90s and downtown was pretty gross then. But it's not the worst downtown in the US. That's because the worst one is none other than fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. It's a huge city, 660,000 people, 24th largest city in the US. The metro has about 2.5 million people. It's the 29th largest metro in the US. When most people think of Las Vegas, they think of the Strip, which is Las Vegas Boulevard with all the high-rise hotels and casinos. So when you look at images of the skyline of Vegas, the Stratosphere Tower is the north end of the Strip, and downtown's about a mile north of that. If you go right downtown to Fremont Street, that's the old Strip. That's the original kind of casino area before the big Las Vegas Strip with the enormous casinos started going up. And it can be pretty cool to hang out there with all the lights and sounds and the things going on the ceiling. But once you get outside the Fremont Street area, downtown Vegas is pretty trashy. Now, that's not to say that the city isn't trying. There are a couple of interesting developments there. One is called the Container Park. There are about 40 shipping containers that are being used for shops. It's kind of cool, but I've seen spots like this be fleshed out much better than this one. Maybe it will improve, but it's okay. Another new development that the city is really proud of is called the Arts District. Well, this is the Arts District. The city calls it urbanist and walkable. So certainly this wouldn't meet the criteria of urbanist and walkable for most cities, but what I think bothers me the most about Vegas is the city has basically a blank slate. There was nothing there 50 years ago. They've been able to do whatever they want with the knowledge of how to develop better cities without doing things like some of the mistakes made in the mid-20th century. And despite knowing all these better urbanist practices over the past 20, 30 years, Vegas keeps doing the same things they were doing back in the 50s and 60s that led to downtowns declining in the first place. But I think of all the downtowns on this list, Vegas is the one that's most likely to stay pretty crappy because the big casinos who run the city don't want you going downtown. They want you on the strip in their casinos. If there was a really vibrant downtown with some cool neighborhoods, some great walkability, some cool shops, restaurants, and bars, everything that's more compact, then a lot of folks wouldn't even bother going down to the strip. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Las Vegas will at some point move away from casinos and realize that they need people to be downtown and get some of the economy away from gambling. But for right now, that isn't the case, and Las Vegas has the worst downtown in the U.S. So there it is, my pick for the 10 worst big city downtowns in the US. And because I'm really more of a positive type guy, look for a best downtowns video coming soon. But if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography from a nerd. And check out these maps here, aren't they beautiful? You'd love to have one, I know you would. Check out the link for Mirrorway Maps. There's a nice coupon code for a discount if you use it. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons for their support, especially my man Keith C. Welcome to the family. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. As always, thank you very much.